We've been talking quite a bit about virtual reality so far in this course. Now let's also talk about types of augmented reality in society. In the case of virtual reality, we have seen that the basic principle that underlies virtual reality is already very old, right? And actually the same thing you could say about augmented reality. So you could argue that people for centuries already have been trying to augment the reality as they knew it, just by adding elements to it. So for instance, the swings you see here in this picture, I mean, there was totally no need to add this to the world as people knew it, right? But still people did it. So they augmented their reality with a certain element that they thought would improve it, that would augment it. And actually the same can be said about augmented reality as we know it. It's just that the elements that are added to society, that are added to the world, are digital in nature in this case. There are basically two main important types of AR that can be distinguished based on the medium that is used to create those augmented reality experiences. On the one hand, there are so-called head-mounted displays. So remember that also in the case of VR, we have seen those head-mounted displays like Oculus Rift. But also in the case of AR, there are displays, there are media that you place on your head, that you mount onto your head. So that's why they're called head-mounted displays. So here you can think of things like Google Glass or Microsoft HoloLens. Those might be terms you have heard of. You place them on your head and they typically look like actual glasses. You can also still look through them. So you still see the actual world, but digital elements are added to it, to the real world. As you can see in this picture here, you're still in this room, the actual room, but a digital element is added to it through those glasses. On the other hand, there are so-called handheld devices, and it makes most sense to think about smartphones. So you use your smartphone, specifically you use the camera in your smartphone to view the actual world, but through your camera that records the actual world, an additional element is added to it. So on the screen of your smartphone, you for instance see one of those Pokemons actually in the real world. So those are today the two most important types of AR as a function of what kind of medium is being used. At the moment, also some companies are working on contact lenses. So the idea is that you place those lenses on your eyes directly. So of course, those devices will be much smaller than those glasses, than your smartphone. And again, those lenses themselves add some kind of digital elements to the real world. It's kind of creepy, right? So because this also means you no longer really notice whether someone is wearing those, whether someone is seeing the world in a different way than you are seeing it. Of course, augmented reality got a bit famous, or more people heard about it through this Pokemon Go hype that was there a couple of years ago. And there, indeed, the idea is that you point your phone at the world through the camera in your phone. You see the actual world, but you see more than the actual world. So yeah, you see some additional digital elements that other people don't see at that moment. And this leads to all sorts of opportunities in society. So you can, for instance, imagine that you go to a certain mall where they have a lot of shops and also restaurants, perhaps. You point your phone at the shops and restaurants that you see, and on your phone at the same time, you see, for instance, some reviews of those stores or some reviews of those restaurants, because your phone recognizes the patterns in the building, for instance, that it sees, and adds some information to it digitally that's not there in the actual world. I should say that also, as you might realize, this type of augmented reality is sometimes called mixed reality, because there's partially the real world and partially there are some digital elements to this. As we have seen in the first week, people have different definitions of AR, of MR, but you could safely say that AR is sort of a type of mixed reality, because there's a sort of a mix between the real world and the digital world that you add to it. Yeah, so here you see, for instance, the Microsoft HoloLens, one version of it, a head-mounted display. You mount it onto your head, and it works more or less. It looks more or less like actual glasses, a bit more futuristic, perhaps. You still see the actual world, but some elements are added to it. And obviously, then there are also many nice applications, things you can do with it. So graphics designers, for instance, could design something on their computer in 2D, so they can still look at it from all sides by turning it around, by pivoting it a bit. but still it's 2D, right, on your computer screen. So with this HoloLens, for instance, you can really bring to life the things that you're creating, that you're designing on your computer screen, and then look at it in 3D, which of course leads to all sorts of advantages. You can really see what something looks like in the real world that you created in 2D on your screen. Yeah, it could also work if you're, for instance, wanting to get a better understanding of the distance, for instance, between two countries. So for instance, if you're flying to Japan from Tilburg, or at least from the Netherlands, it might be hard based on a map or based on some text to really understand how far that is and where you will be flying. But if you have this 3D globe that you can add to the world, you can really see what the distance is, how long it will take, the sort of countries you will cross while flying. So it might lead to some different types of knowledge, types of understanding that you wouldn't really get when you would just see this type of information on a computer screen or when you would read about it. So then you might also wonder if this is also super nice, and so if this works so well, why don't more and more people use this actually? Well, one reason is that it might be a bit expensive for just consumers to buy this, but a different, very important issue, also the issue that played a major role why, for instance, the Google Glass didn't really work out for people, is that those glasses allow you to also film, to videotape, to record what you're seeing at that very moment. So you can imagine you might meet someone wearing a Google Glass or wearing a HoloLens, and you won't be entirely sure whether that person is sort of videotaping you or not. The same will hold for those lenses, perhaps in the future, which makes it still a bit creepier even. So that's really a drawback of this method so far, that people don't really trust it. So if you're wearing those glasses, if you're meeting someone who wears those glasses, the person might be filming you, you might not feel good enough about just sharing your actual thought because you're thinking, well, maybe it's filmed, maybe I'm being filmed. So those sort of camera and privacy issues, they've played a major role so far. Why I think those tools are not really picked up yet by a very broad audience. So, all right, that's something to think about in any case for all those methods that we're discussing, VR, AR, MR. Of course, those methods are recording and tracking things. And of course, this can be very sensitive, private information that you actually don't want to share with different parties.